2025. The Internet. In a fully digital age consisting of major IT developments, tech supercenters, and constant improvements from the Internet, we find ourselves more connected than we ever have been. Everyone's pursuit to find the next big thing to talk about often leads people down some pretty strange rabbit holes, and since conspiracy theorists have been batting 1,000 as of late, it is no shocker that it doesn't take long in today's digital society for a conspiracy to be born and spread amongst the populace like wildfire. And perhaps one of the strangest food conspiracies that I've ever heard of, the internet is starting to claim that Mountain Dew, one of the most popular soft drinks of all time, has some type of sinister motive behind their myriad of flavors, and people online have claimed that the releases of these flavors coincide with major disasters, global blackouts, horrendous wildfires, and even 9/11. Is it truly possible that Mountain Dew, owned by PepsiCo, could be predicting the grim future with different flavor releases? Could this modern-day conspiracy be rooted in a previous collaboration between PepsiCo, one of the largest corporate beverage entities in the world, and the CIA to help destabilize an international government? Today on Unblurring the Unknown, we dive into and explore a fascinating online rumor that has taken a Baja Blast up the conspiracy charts. Today on the show, we explore the Mountain Dew conspiracy. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and I want to say welcome back to the show. If you're checking this show out on either YouTube or Spotify, first, a big thank you for checking out the show. If you're listening on Spotify, please turn on post notifications so you get notified every time I release a new episode. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps me out within the algorithm, and I greatly appreciate it. With that being said, I've taken a little bit of a hiatus as of recently. When I finished episode 100, I said that I was going to take a few weeks off, and I have. And it's always good to take a little bit of time off, a little bit of a break, kind of get a mental reset, recharge a little bit, kind of produce some more scripts, queue up some new episodes, what I got coming next for you. I hope to keep it kind of diverse, interesting, everything like that. My previous 100th episode has done very, very well on YouTube, and everybody has given me a lot of support so far. So again, thank you very much. Whether this is the first time of you checking out my channel, or whether this is the 101st time you are listening to the show, again, I cannot thank you enough for all the support and everything like that. And like I said, it is so good to be back here again with a new episode this week, and I'm feeling good heading into this week and the foreseeable future for the show. And like I said, I felt like taking a brief hiatus. With that, coming back with maybe an easy episode, something fun, something lighthearted, and after all, we talk about some pretty messed up shit on a pretty regular basis, so it was always nice to get that much-needed palate cleanser of an episode every once in a while. So for this week's episode, I wanted us to have a little fun with it, and eventually that led me down this rabbit hole to cover for you for this week. Now, some of you might have heard of this topic before, and if you frequent maybe some conspiracy-loaded sides of TikTok, this one might have come up on your feed a time or two, like it has mine. Now, this theory kind of gained some traction last year, and it has started to pop up here and there this year, as things have kind of progressed with the active situation currently going on in the Middle East, or it has certainly at least popped up on my feed more since then. However, today on the show, we are really going to talk about this theory and the basis of it, and the overall ideas of it that people really hone into, and then after that, we're going to talk about a separate instance in which the CIA and PepsiCo worked together during the 1970s for a common interest, which, once you think about it, maybe this theory about there being some type of deep-rooted cover-up going on in which PepsiCo is either predicting or mocking major disasters, and perhaps that opens a much larger can of worms than you initially might think. Now, I already have my own personal opinion when it comes to this entire theory, but of course, I am going to save that until the very end. However, if you are completely in the dark about what this conspiracy is about, let me explain it to you. The basis of this theory is that whenever Mountain Dew releases a new flavor, it strangely coincides with some type of major event, whether that be a natural disaster, terrorist attack, or something else entirely. Now, you might be wondering what type of evidence there is to support this theory, and let's dive into that and explain the flavors of Mountain Dew, and there's a lot of them, to support this theory, and all of the so-called evidence that kind of back up this theory. Now, there are some main ones to talk about, like Code Red, Voltage, Maui Burst, Star Spangled Splash, and Pitch Black, just to name a few, that have contributed to this theory. However, I wanted to take it deeper than that and explore all of the mainline Mountain Dew flavors that have been released, and if there could be a connection between the announcement of a new Mountain Dew flavor and some type of major disaster. I wanted to take this a little bit steps further. Obviously, some conspiracy theorists, some content creators, they hone in on a few of those that I just mentioned. However, I wanted to look at all of them as a big picture. Of course, there are dozens of either discontinued Mountain Dew flavors and things like that, so it's very difficult to cover all of them, so I wanted to cover at least the main flavors that Mountain Dew has released. So with that being said, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, and let's begin in 2001. But before we begin in 2001, let's do a little history lesson. Of course, Mountain Dew, if you are not aware, has a very long history. Of course, many people probably know it as one of the more popular sodas to exist, and it was first created back in 1940 in Tennessee by Barney and Allie Hartman. Now, originally it did not start out as a soda, but rather a mixer to be used with whiskey. When the Hartmans had moved to Tennessee, they were unable to find their preferred whiskey mixer, a beverage called Natural Setup, so they devised a plan to make their own. The original design of Mountain Dew was something more comparable to what Sprite or 7-Up is today. Now, a carbonated lime-flavored beverage that originally did not contain any caffeine was the original basis of Mountain Dew. And Mountain Dew kind of became synonymous with Tennessee and the South in general, and was often seen with a hillbilly-like figure as a marketing tactic, and was often accompanied with the slogan, "It'll tickle your innards," which certainly does not have the connotation it has now as it did back then. Mountain Dew also being a term used very often by moonshiners. Now, eventually in 1958, a revised formula of Mountain Dew was created by Bill Bridgeforth, and eventually after that, Mountain Dew was purchased and the distributing rights were taken on by the Tip Corporation. Bridgeforth, with Bill Jones of Tip, would create a beverage known as Tri-City Lemonade, and eventually that would merge with the Mountain Dew recipe and then be revised into something more similar to what we have today. Flash forward to 1964 is when Mountain Dew would be acquired by PepsiCo, by the Tip Corporation, and Pepsi would instantly explode the distribution of the drink to the entire United States and Canada. In 1974, the recipe for the soft drink would change again, slightly this time, adopting a slight orange flavoring in the bright green color that would become very brand recognizable for the drink going forward. For roughly 40 years, there was only one flavor of Mountain Dew until 1988, a Diet Mountain Dew would be produced, and another flavor that would be very short-lived, called Mountain Dew Red, which would be the brand's first attempt of a cherry-flavored beverage. However, the marketing was very small, and it unfortunately never took off. That would be until May 2001, when Mountain Dew Code Red would be announced, and this would be the brand's first real big push to create a new flavor of Mountain Dew and market it to a very broad audience. Code Red would become very popular and still maintain itself as a flavor to this day. However, Mountain Dew Code Red perhaps is the first example that we have with the Mountain Dew conspiracy, and the release of this first flavor, according to some conspiracy theorists, foreshadows a major disaster that would alter United States history forever, and that being 9/11. Of course, I am certain you all know about the events that would transpire on September 11th, 2001, and why that event single-handedly changed the course of perhaps of entire history, certainly American history as we know it. However, some claim that the release of Mountain Dew Code Red was a precursor to that event, as 9/11 was widely referred to as a Code Red emergency. Now, some have claimed online, or at least what I was able to find, that the term Code Red emergency being used in this context was a relative first, when talking about a disaster, and I can't seem to find one thing or another proving that claim or disproving that claim when talking about the term code red in this instance. However, code red as a term has been used to signify something bad for probably 40 to 50 years at this point, and is probably most known in the hospital settings for denoting a fire-related emergency. But it has been used in emergency response as well for quite a long time. So the term code red was not created post 9/11, so the defense of saying that this term, code red emergency, was more than just a coincidence, post-disaster, that's a pretty far reach by saying that the name had some type of connotation with calling 9/11 a code red emergency. And for the release, the soda was released in May of 2011, or 2001, where 9/11 would happen 4 months later. Now, I believe in some things being more than just a coincidence, but it does seem like this is grasping at straws. It does not point to a direct affiliation with the disaster itself, it doesn't predict the disaster, and it doesn't even line up with the date of the disaster. Just named after a term that already existed in the first place, and also, Mountain Dew Code Red was chosen. That name was chosen through a poll done through multiple different focus groups. Mountain Dew actually did not want to call it Code Red initially. That was just the name that performed much better with the focus groups. So, in my opinion, this one is a big swing and a miss for me. Perhaps the only question you could make here is that PepsiCo filed for the trademark back for Code Red on September 21st, 2000. Which again, we're in the right month, but we're off by a whole year. Now, the next flavor in Mountain Dew's lineup would be Livewire, which would be released initially back in May of 2003, with a hope to hit markets for the summer. Now, this is a flavor that I have not seen talked about very much within the overall conspiracy here, but there are a few events that do take place within the summer of 2003 that could be notable and connected to the conspiracy if you want to believe it. Perhaps the most notable would be the Northeast blackout of 2003 and a series of major solar storms in October that would cause numerous issues with satellites and power grid disturbances. That blackout of the northeastern United States would take place on August 14th of 2003, and roughly 50 million people all throughout the northeastern United States and even Canada were affected. Now, the name of Livewire might add credibility to this portion of the conspiracy, as of course being called a live wire might mean that you are full of energy or something that has flowing electricity through it. In this case, it would be the opposite, but again, so far these seem like very large coincidences more than anything else. Now, if you subscribe to the idea that Mountain Dew releasing these flavors could be a precursor to a major event, I can see why maybe you think this way, and maybe I will slowly be convinced as this episode continues, but so far, I am not convinced. You could take any product and affiliate it with an event and say that it was a precursor, when in reality, you have so many different things happening on a week-to-week basis that, in my opinion, not everything is related. But again, that is just me. And like I said, I will try to save my overall thoughts and my overall opinions as we kind of continue through this episode. I'll try to keep those thoughts and opinions to myself. Now, the next flavor to be released into Mountain Dew's portfolio would be the uber popular Baja Blast, which originally would be released as an exclusive to just Taco Bell. It became so popular, it prompted summer sales to the general public and distributors pretty much on an annual basis. It has now solidified itself as a permanent flavor throughout the country, and however, I started looking into events that could be affiliated with Baja Blast and maybe some plays on the name that factor into some type of natural disaster or event of some sort, and the only one that I could seem to find would be a tsunami that would take place in India in December of 2004. On December 26, 2004, a massive 9.1 to 9.3 magnitude earthquake would be recorded off the coast of Sumatra in the Indian Ocean. It devastated portions of the Indian coast, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, and to this day it is the deadliest disaster of the 21st century. Over 220,000 people died, and the crisis triggered a massive global humanitarian response. Needless to say, it was really, really bad. And if you subscribe to this Mountain Dew conspiracy theory, this means that the release of Baja Blast had something to do with the tsunami. Now, I have seen some things online about this that stated that Baja in Spanish means casualty. And while it does, It does mean that if you use Baja as a noun. Now, it also means low, from what I was also able to find. So, Baja has multiple different meanings depending on the context. Now, perhaps the most notable usage of Baja would be in the region of Baja California, which means low California. In this instance, and that makes sense when you kind of know where Baja is located on a map or where Baja California is located on a map, low California makes sense. The low Baja connection, it makes more sense. The Baja Blast tsunami link to me is pretty weak, perhaps even weaker than the code red in Livewire disaster connections. The release of Baja Blast would take place in July of 2004, and this tsunami would not happen until December of 2004, a full 6 months later. Also, what is the connection between Baja Blast and a tsunami? Of course, India is not Baja California. Baja is a Spanish word. It is not a word that is used in India or anywhere in Indonesia or anything like that. So it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The name of the flavor does not seem to coincide with the disaster itself. And I have trouble believing the Baja Blast connection personally. Now, the next flavor I want to talk about is Mountain Dew Pitch Black, which for a long time was not a permanent flavor until recently, and even then it had a short shelf life as a permanent flavor, but it was a permanent flavor, so I want to cover it. Pitch Black was released during the Halloween season of 2004, originally as a limited time flavor. I could not find a precise release date, but I have to assume in general that this was October of 2004. Now, Pitch Black, the name, of course, gives connotations of the absence of light, and this led me down the rabbit hole of finding an event that occurred where no light was present. Overall, this was kind of tricky, as 2004 seemed to be a year that was headlined with extreme weather, like the tsunami we just mentioned, but also a severe hurricane and tornado season in the United States as well. However, I did find that there was an explosion in a Chinese coal mine in October of 2004, and this piqued my interest. On October 20th, 2004, at the Deping mine near Zhengzhou, China, a massive gas explosion would take place in the mine. The result, from what I could find, would be roughly 122 people losing their lives. In addition, other coal mine-related disasters would take place around the same time frame in China, where a blast at the Chongping municipality left 12 dead, and a flood at the Hebei province left 29 miners stranded. Now, I was able to find this information through NBC News and a website named China.org, which is a little on the nose, in which the title of that article would be, on the China.org page, would be October 20th, a Black Day for Miners. Now, that sounds really weird when I say it out loud, and again, I mean miners, M-I-N-E-R-S. Again, when you're saying something and you can't read it personally, it just sounds weird when you say it out loud. So I just wanted to clarify. Now, of course, this is the most Pitch Black related incidents I could find, and to be honest, this is the one flavor I have found that might have some more evidence to support this overall Mountain Dew conspiracy. Between aptly titled news articles, the abundance of black dust and toxic gas that would fill these mines during these events, it would be reasonable to assume that these would equate to pitch black environments. Now, even though this perhaps is the strongest candidate so far, there is no evidence, other than just mere coincidence, linking the name of a soft drink that was a limited time release, and it actually wasn't even ever distributed in China. Now, when Pitch Black would return for a limited run from January to March of 2023, a popular theory that has been spread amongst conspiracy theory circles is that this re-release of Pitch Black was basically foreshadowing of the massive CrowdStrike IT outages that would hit the United States in the summer of 2024, where over 8.5 million devices were affected. Now, this to me, this CrowdStrike IT outage affiliation with Pitch Black, it's pretty common when you look into the Mountain Dew conspiracy as a general. To me, like I said, this has little to no merit. And I don't know why people naturally affiliated the CrowdStrike IT outage with Pitch Black, or if they were just trying to make up some more substance to a conspiracy theory that so far I don't think holds a lot of weight. Now, the timing of this is all off. You're off by over a year at this point. And if you wanted to say that Pitch Black was around during 2024, you actually would be slightly correct. Pitch Black was available during 2024, but it was only available in 7-Eleven stores in 2024 post-September of that year. So if you think about it, post-September 2024, and then the limited run from January to March of 2023, neither of these release times coincides with the CrowdStrike blackout whatsoever. Now, let's jump ahead to the year of 2008 and the next permanent release of a Mountain Dew flavor, and that being Mountain Dew Voltage. Voltage was released in the summer of 2008, along with 2 other flavors where fans were told to vote on which one was their favorite for it to become a permanent flavor. Voltage would beat out the other 2 competitors and re-release as a permanent flavor in December of 2008. Now, with the name Voltage, I started looking into anything electrical based, as there isn't any other interpretation for the word that I could find that perhaps could have any other meaning. I instantly thought of the 2008 financial crisis, but it doesn't seem like there could be a relation whatsoever. However, there could be a relation with Hurricane Ike, which hit late summer of 2008 in September. This was a very powerful hurricane that struck the Gulf of Mexico and moved into Texas, and then fragments of it dispersed throughout the Midwest. This was a very powerful storm, and for the sake of the conspiracy, it left millions without power. So in this case, maybe a lack of voltage. Now, this would line up with the original release of Voltage, but what about the re-release in December? In mid-December, a major ice storm would hit the northeastern United States, leaving millions without power, some for multiple weeks on end. While this storm would take place a couple weeks before Voltage's re-release to the market, it is interesting that you have 2 major debilitating storms that affected millions of Americans' power supplies for almost weeks on end around the same time of the release of the beverage. This one is certainly a little bit strange. Mountain Dew Whiteout would be the next flavor we're going to talk about here, and it would be released in 2010, after it also won a voting contest from the general population. Whiteout maintained itself as a permanent flavor for a very long time before eventually being discontinued and then brought back as a limited time flavor currently. Now, when thinking Whiteout as somebody from New England, that makes me think of a snowstorm. And what I found that could coincide with Mountain Dew Whiteout's release date was the Groundhog Day blizzard of 2011. Whiteout was released in stores in October of 2010, making any snow-related issues within the name delayed until that winter of 2010 into 2011 realistically. Now, the Groundhog Day blizzard affected most of the central United States, with Wisconsin, Indiana, and Illinois being the prime targets. Over the course of really a day and a half, over 2 feet of snow fell in some places. Now, while this storm is significant, to me, these storms do happen pretty frequently during heavy snowfall years throughout the northern portion of the United States. So, unfortunately, this isn't some type of freaks one-off snowstorm thing that I would like to think maybe could be affiliated with some type of deep-rooted conspiracy. Overall, when it comes to Mountain Dew Whiteout, I also think this one is a little bit of a reach. Now, the next Mountain Dew flavor I do want to cover is Major Melon. And while Major Melon was a permanent flavor for roughly 4 years, it actually would be discontinued in early 2025. Now, Major Melon is interesting as it is not directly listed anywhere as being a contributor to the overall Mountain Dew conspiracy. However, the timing of it and the name could be foreshadowing, and let me explain why. Major Melon, while not openly stating it anywhere in its marketing, gives military connotations, complete with the symbol of a dog tag displayed on the packaging of the bottle. Major Melon would be released in January of 2021, and the most notable military action taken during the year of 2021 would be the widely criticized withdrawal from Afghanistan, which left over a dozen U.S. servicemen and women killed, and even more injured during attacks by the Taliban conducted during withdrawals. Now, I am not going to get into the ever-shifting and downright crazy political climate the United States has seen since then, but the overall withdrawal from Afghanistan was a significant shift in the United States operations in the Middle East, and while at the time President Trump had signed a deal with the Taliban to remove U.S. forces from Afghanistan by May 1st, 2021, as long as the Taliban held up its end of the bargain. As presidents changed, then President Joe Biden did not stick to the original deal made by President Trump and instead pushed the withdrawal date to September 11th of 2021 for very kind of symbolic reasons. On the surface, it kind of makes sense. However, again, this does go against the deal that the Taliban had signed with the United States earlier in that year. Now, whether or not this was the right decision is not mine to comment on, but as May 1st hit, the Taliban realized that the deal obviously did not take hold, and the Taliban shifted gears and mounted an offensive into Afghanistan, conquering land and making a push towards Kabul. Now, because of this would cause a rapid escalation of evacuating United States personnel and civilians living within the city. The situation would eventually come to a head on August 15th, 2021, when the United States Embassy in Kabul would fall to the Taliban. At the time, the withdrawal had almost worked counterintuitively, as the U.S. was forced to deploy more troops to hold back the Taliban offensive rather than evacuating them. Of course, I am generalizing and giving you a broad synopsis of the withdrawal of Afghanistan in 2021. The moral of this story is that this whole situation was botched regardless of who you root for. And again, I've said it time and time on this show, I don't talk politics on this show. I'm for power of the people. I'm for the People's Party. I support all you guys. I support you all watching the show. I support that little guy in the middle who doesn't have a voice. That's who I support. So I don't talk about politics on the show. I do this for entertainment purposes, and there's a reason I don't pick a dog in the fight, because it's not my place to comment on that, and I don't think anybody else wants more politics in their day. But that's my own personal opinion. However, with this entire situation, the timing of Major Melon's release is interesting, because this would have been perhaps the most notable United States military involvement at the time, and the military being on the news again would have been a fairly common sight. However, again, like the other flavors, this seems to be purely coincidence, and there is no evidence supporting the idea that Mountain Dew, of all things, could have been predicting the intense military involvement at that time. Now, the next flavor I want to talk about, and this is probably one of the most popular, if not the popular flavor that people talk about when they talk about the Mountain Dew conspiracy, is the flavor Maui Burst. Now, Maui Burst was a very limited release Mountain Dew flavor that was only existed for around a month in 2019, and it was only available for purchase in Dollar General stores. Now, it was attempted to be rebooted in 2020 due to high demand. However, even though there was high demand, it still did not last. It has since been discontinued. The Maui Burst flavor has become one of the most, like I mentioned, significant entries into the Mountain Dew conspiracy, with some claiming that the name Maui Burst is a reference to the Maui, Hawaii wildfires that took place in 2023. Now, while on the surface, the name seems more direct and to the point, keep in mind the Maui Burst flavor was released a whole 4 years before the wildfires even took place. At that point, it just doesn't hold any weight to me. Just because something eventually happened doesn't mean that it was tied together from something from 4 years ago. I find it really funny that this is one of the ones that is talked about the most, quite frankly. I know that there are a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding the Maui wildfires, and honestly, that could be its own episode in and of itself. But to think that a Mountain Dew flavor released 4 years prior to the actual fires could be related might seem like a little bit of a stretch. Now, the other entry I want to talk about in Mountain Dew's flavor profile that people often affiliate with the Mountain Dew conspiracy, and again, this is probably, I said Maui Burst was probably one of the most notable. This is one where I think it really started to take hold in the internet when people started talking about, okay, Mountain Dew was predicting these disasters, because this one seems a little bit more on the nose than other flavors that we have talked about, and that is the flavor Star Spangled Splash. Now, Star Spangled Splash would be another recent Mountain Dew flavor that would find itself swooped up into this controversy as well. Now, this flavor was released in the summer of 2024 as a limited time run, and it would rapidly add to this conspiracy when people realized that the name of this drink bore a resemblance to the events that would unfold shortly before this drink's release of that year. Now, a month before the drink's release, in June of 2024, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Maryland would collapse. Now, how do these two relate? The splash and the name of the Mountain Dew flavor being for the bridge collapsing into the water below, and Francis Scott Key, obviously the name of the bridge, was the creator of the Star-Spangled Banner, America's national anthem. Now, these connections on the surface are pretty hard to overlook. The name seems to reference a specific event. Now, could this be some type of taunt, or that perhaps this was some type of prediction of what was going to happen in the future, and thus the Mountain Dew flavors are predictions of certain events? Even the best clairvoyants and prophets aren't always right. If anything, they are wrong more than they are right. Could Mountain Dew, or better yet Pepsi, be guessing the events of what is to come and maybe even sometimes playing on them a little bit? And as compelling as this theory might be on the surface, that Mountain Dew and Pepsi could be guessing events of what's to come, and, maybe sometimes they are right and maybe sometimes they aren't, we have this silly little thing called evidence. And we just don't have enough of that, in my opinion, when it comes to this overall controversy. When you start plucking flavors out of a hat and you start kind of throwing them into a big bucket and trying to pair them up with events of what they could possibly be related to, it's all circumstantial. It's all coincidence. There's no evidence that said Mountain Dew is connected to this. We just unfortunately don't have that. However, this now brings us to the present day, where last year this conspiracy gained traction on the internet again, and people awaited the release of another Mountain Dew flavor, with Baja Midnight being released at Taco Bell across the country. However, from what I could find, it doesn't appear anything happened that people have attributed to this overall conspiracy, but that was only what I was able to find. I was not able to find any event that seemingly kind of played with the words of Baja Midnight or had anything to do with it. I could not find any specific event of that. But if somebody has done research into this and they have found maybe a disaster that they think could be affiliated with the release of Baja Midnight, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. However, this now brings us again to present day. This conspiracy has been brought back up again because of a new Mountain Dew flavor that is set to release this year, named Dirty Mountain Dew, which is a cream soda-based Mountain Dew, and it is capitalizing on the much larger trend of dirty sodas going on right now. Now, if you were out of the loop on what that is, because some of you might be listening and you might be being like, Dominic, what are you talking about? What's a dirty soda? And that begins and ends with another TV show called The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Oh, gosh. I'm having fun with this episode. Like I said, I told you this was going to be a lighthearted episode, and I meant that. This is fun. I'm talking about The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives on a episode of Unblurring the Unknown. I never thought I'd ever even think about that in the course of this show's existence. But again, dirty sodas. Back to this whole idea. Back to the conspiracy here. Again, that's AKA sodas with cream in them and other mix-ins and things like that. Again, there's other things going on with the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives involving furniture being thrown. If you're chronically online, you will understand that reference, but I will not dive any deeper into that. However, where does that leave us? Now that we have this understanding of the multiple flavors that could have been possible, or that could have had possible disasters attached to them, we need to talk about a time where the CIA and Pepsi worked together against a common enemy, and that being communism. And no, I am not kidding. To fully understand this portion of the story and this little U-turn we're about to take, we need to take it all the way back to 1970. Now, many people know during this time period, the world was a very pressure-laden place. You had the United States hell-bent on protecting American interests and capitalism, and the Cold War was a present issue. At the time, the Chilean government was going through some changes. In the years prior, the United States held very special interests in Chile, mostly for financial reasons. To summarize, the United States had corporate interest in Chile, and for that to work to these corporations' benefit, they would need to have a capitalist in power, and the best way to ensure that happened, in a day and age where communism and socialism were very much prevalent, was to invest in your asset. And by asset, I mean candidate. The United States monetarily backed a political candidate in Chile in the early 1960s to ensure that he won the election. So the United States basically bought a politician, a Chilean politician in the 1960s. I learned so much different stuff by doing this show, and you have no idea. I learned so many different weird rabbit holes of history, and I find that really history itself is just a big circle of things that just happen over and over again, whether it's the same countries just coming back into the mix or whether it's always communism, it seems. But again, let's get back to the episode. However, when the election of 1970 came around in Chile, the political climate had actually shifted. The communist and socialist parties started unifying as party lines shifted, and they came together and put their stock behind a new candidate, a communist named Salvador Allende. Now, because of this surge, Allende would actually end up winning the election, and this would put the American corporations, who sunk millions of dollars into corporate interests in Chile, in jeopardy. CEO of Pepsi, Donald Kendall, would supposedly spur on the idea of possible U.S. military involvement in a potential coup of the incoming president Allende. Pepsi had significant investments into a Chilean bottling facility, and a communist coming into power could jeopardize Pepsi's business, and many other companies who made side deals and investments felt the same way. However, Pepsi had an in with the United States government, and that being their former lawyer, who happened to be now sitting president, Richard Nixon. Now, in summary, the United States would eventually help execute a coup within Chile to overthrow the president-elect Allende, and then afterwards they would do this whole, well, the CIA investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing, so there's that. But this connection with Pepsi and other massive corporations involving themselves to some degree with the CIA, and then the CIA in many regards operating as an organization often tasked or conducting perhaps some of the more bizarre but equally wrong experiments and military exercises to both the American public and to other countries, make some people wonder that maybe there's a deeper affiliation between PepsiCo and the United States government than there is on the surface. Now, whether or not that is the case, we unfortunately don't have any evidence to prove or disprove it, but it certainly makes you think that there could be other instances in which corporations have put money first and have gone to outrageous lengths to do so. Now, could there be a much larger connection with the Mountain Dew conspiracy in the CIA? That part is hard to say. But a lot of the evidence we do have is vague and circumstantial. But this connection from the 1970s alone is enough to get people talking about this, and even Mountain Dew themselves joking in on the fun, as they sometimes have commented on TikToks in posts about the Mountain Dew conspiracy, jokingly telling people to keep their voices down about it. Now, overall, at this point in the episode, I think I could go on and talk about theories on this. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I just don't think there is enough here to throw out a whole lot in terms of theories. I quite frankly don't think that Mountain Dew is predicting the future, or predicting major disasters, or anything like that. Even then, I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I talked about just the mainline Mountain Dew flavors for the most part. There have been so many different flavors and releases and discontinued Mountain Dew products that if you look at every single possible flavor and try to correlate that with some type of disaster or event, you will find yourself going down the rabbit hole and affiliating with them with events that had absolutely nothing to do with a soda. It's just way too much and way too vast to think that everything could be affiliated with some type of disaster or notable event. Regardless, though, that is not going to stop the internet from thinking that the new Mountain Dew release, or possibly even the one after that, is going to be an omen for some type of mass casualty event. While it is certainly not out of the realm of question, because stranger things have happened, like the Stranger Thing finale, even though that happened back in January, the idea of it being common occurrence and some type of deep-rooted cover-up that Pepsi in the CIA have been doing this little Ben in cahoots thing for a very long time and are doing this as some sort of weird, sadistic way to mock the public or foreshadow events seems odd and very strange. And again, quite the reach. However, feel free to let me know in the comment section about your own personal opinions on the Mountain Dew conspiracy and what you think is going to happen following the new flavor release. What do you think the disaster will be? I personally find it fun to speculate because, again, unfortunately, I personally have a very hard time believing this conspiracy. However, also, if you were diehard behind this conspiracy, let me know in the comments. Let me hear your defense here. Let me hear your defense on why you think the Mountain Dew conspiracy is real. I am here to believe it. I am here to back you up. Go down in the comments and tell me why you think that Mountain Dew Code Red had something to do with 9/11. Tell me that. I love that. I love the engagement. I love talking to people. I love replying to people's comments. That is fun to me. Unless they say I'm AI. Because I'm not AI. I'm a real person. And I have feelings. So don't come at me about AI. I really dislike that. I've said it on times before on this show. If this is your first time checking me out, nothing about my show is AI. I do all the research myself, all the script writing, all of the recording. This is my actual voice. Even though it does sound weird to hear my voice played back, it's one of those weird things where sometimes it just sounds weird to hear your own voice on a loop back to each other. But that's neither here nor there. The only thing I ever use AI for in my shows is creating the base graphic for the designs for the episodes. It is only because I am not artistically inclined whatsoever. If you've read any of my comments, I say that in the comments as well, replying to comments on my episodes as well. You'll see me say that. That's the only piece of AI I use anywhere in this show. I actually, quite frankly, I really despise AI for most of anything in day-to-day life. It's just I do appreciate it for making my base graphics for me. But other than that, that's the only thing I ever use AI for. But again, back to Mountain Dew here for a second. Again, let me know in the comments whether or not you believe the Mountain Dew conspiracy is real. Unfortunately to me, I don't think it holds much weight, and I'm going to stick by that. I can't float conspiracy theories around there. As much as I would think would be cool that there could be some type of, maybe relation between maybe Pepsi and the CIA. Maybe maybe they're in cahoots with each other. That is fun to think about, and that is fun to speculate. But again, unfortunately, no evidence to prove it. I'm not fully eliminating another question, but it is very hard to believe. With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Like I said, a little bit more laid back than maybe you're used to. Again, I took these few weeks off. I needed the time, the mental reset, everything like that. And it feels very good to be back in front of a microphone, making more episodes for you all. And I greatly appreciate the support and the love and everything like that people have given me. It means the world. But with that being said, that is going to do it for this week's episode on the Mountain Dew conspiracy. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I will see you all on the next one.